It is my great pleasure to welcome Jocelyn Mangan of Him for Her to VC++. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I am Jocelyn Mangan, the CEO and founder of Him for Her. And I founded Him for Her really out of a passion for women at work, which is quite a broad category. And I honed in on the boardroom. I knew that it was the most powerful room in business. I learned that luckily at a young age. I have a long background in technology. I've been in the boardroom as an operator. I've witnessed some powerful conversations. But like many of us, I also was reading a lot about the lack of diversity on boards. And I knew that that would be a great place to start. So I am a product manager at heart. I also looked at the data and saw that most of the board seats were occupied by men. Most of my career has been spent working exclusively for and with men and to large success. And so I sought out their partnership and I interviewed 90 men. And what I learned was they all wanted to help and they didn't know how. And then the second thing I learned that helped shape our approach is that they found their board members through personal networks. So if you zoom out, as an organization, our vision is that we transform lives by unlocking the social and the economic benefit of a diverse boardroom. We know without a doubt it's not a pipeline issue, it's a network gap. And that network gap is caused by that personal behavior of dipping into networks, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing. People love to hire people based on trust and relationship, especially in the boardroom. The challenge is just that the networks aren't diverse. So Him for Her exists really to close that network gap. And we do it in 4 specific ways. The first is that we see the network with warm introductions. I launched the company with the dinner with Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit. We went on to do 36 dinners in 12 cities with some iconic hosts. Many you might have heard of: Reid Hoffman, Jeff Weiner, Brian Moynihan, Mark Weinberger. And we've carried those conversations online. And those are small curated conversations that facilitate those introductions of people who may not have otherwise met. We also build candidate lists for companies, CEOs, and investors. We do education for everyone in our network. And finally, we do benchmarking. You can't change what you don't measure. So we partner a lot with private equity and venture specifically around benchmarking.
Awesome. So I'm a huge fan, and what you do is attacking the boardroom problem in a different way than Board++, but I think there's so much that can be done around taking friction out of well-intentioned boards that would be willing to diversify if only it wasn't an unpredictable and time-consuming task. And so
correct. And I think that that's a lot of what we try to do, is make it as easy as possible to widen the aperture and look at candidates that you maybe wouldn't have otherwise seen.
So can you talk a little bit about the state of play in the startup scene with women on boards, and what it's like today, how it's changed over the last decade, and where it might go?
Sure. So I can talk a little bit. We did a study last year. So Him for Her, in full disclosure, works with companies of all stages, right? Mm-hmm. So we work with early stage all the way to Fortune 50. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that public companies are only 1% of all companies. And their data around this space is fairly well known because it's easy. Well, I shouldn't say easily. It's at least public information, so it's trackable. So we're seeing the statistics around the progress in the public company space. So a little over a year ago, we embarked on a study with Crunchbase and Kellogg around the private company space. Because what we found is that data wasn't as readily available. And because it's what we learned after much work, it's not that easy to come by. But we did a study of the most highly funded venture-backed companies. We chose that segment because those are the companies that represent our products and services of the future. Right? Whether that's how our data is stored, how our healthcare is experienced, how our children get educated. These are the high growth companies shaping our future. What we found in our research was 60% of those boards were all male. we actually even found, if you broke it down by the seed, I think a lot of people might look at that data and say, yes, well, that's an investor issue, which it is. And there's great organizations like Allraise who are looking to diversify the pipeline of funders and founders. But if you looked at the independent seat, which we did, we also found that only 1 in 5 was a woman. So
Right.
your question was over time. I'd say for us, that was the starting point, is to know what we're working with. So we did the study not really to blame or shame anyone. It was really just to understand the landscape and the opportunity. And so what I think is an amazing opportunity is right now, given all the multitude of crises that have revealed so much inequality, there's more attention to this. There's more awareness. You know, I think the boardroom is a space that needs a little bit of demystification if you haven't been in it, right? We can all picture Congress, right? We may not have all been to Congress, but we can picture it. And yet I think if you haven't been in a boardroom or participated in it, it's hard to see how outsized that influence actually has on not just the economics of that one company, but as I said, the products and services that that company produces and the people that those products and services impact, right?
And the culture of the company, I think. There's a
And the culture of the company.
culture signal.
Yes, I mean, we had a board member that we were fortunate enough to make an introduction that landed a placement. And one of the first jobs she had on her board was to look at their DE&I strategy. And she was the first woman on the board. So you think about just that one appointment. We don't know yet because it's fairly recent, but my guess would be there's going to be an outsized impact, not in just in the immediate role she's there to fill, but like you said, on the culture, on the way people think about how we're dealing with equality.
Yeah, one of the other organizations that will speak is Bloomberg. It's done a gender equality index for really big companies, but the data are much harder to come by for the privately held companies of all sizes. Did the study that you did focus on US markets, or was it global?
Yes, so this was US only. And a lot of our work, as we were 2 years old, so we're relatively new, has started in the United States. The United States is actually further behind a lot of other countries in this space as well. We have moved into Canada and the UK, and we hope to become more global over time, but there is a lot of work to do here in the United States and with the broad swath of companies that we have based here.
So how are you tracking impact of the programs that you do? What are the numbers and OKRs, and how do you position and measure success?
So we track this kind of along those 4 pillars of what we do. So in the spirit of introductions, we've built a network of over 2,000 board-ready women. They're all hand-referred. We facilitated close to 3,000 introductions for those board-ready women. So we track not only who we welcome into the network, but also how much visibility those candidates are getting. We also track how many the kind of the funnel of those referrals in our referral service. So I've shared that we've helped over 300 companies and CEOs with referrals, and we track that movement through the process. And what we learned was, of those companies who placed a board member, now not all 300 have placed a board member, as if you're in this space, you know it's kind of a wild and windy road introduction to placement, depending on the company and the sense of urgency and the time allotted.
And there's always personal chemistry in the last mile, no matter what.
Yes,
Yeah.
but we do track it. And so of those who placed a board member, we know over a quarter came from us. So
Wow.
we've had success in from introduction to placement.
Really exciting.
I should mention that we also have an explicit focus on intersections within gender, specifically women of color. And that's another area that we're closely tracking. We're tracking not only how many we have in our network, and we're actively seeking that information within our network for people to self-identify, but also how much visibility we're providing in the different areas.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about what you do to prepare candidates? One of the things that that I've heard in interviewing people that have taken boards. One thing they say is they wish they'd done it a lot sooner. And another thing they say is that when I say, how was your first board meeting and how well prepared were you to walk into the room, they often say I was just kind of pushed in without much prep. So I guess my question is, what advice do you have for when people should contemplate a board seat on their professional journey? And
Great.
I'll say, I'm already telling college kids, if you have executive ambition, think about when, not if. And then what can you do to prepare for having that great first impression when you enter the boardroom?
It's never too soon to be thinking about it, right? We had college interns helping him for her this summer, and it was great to see their curiosity and to help them learn a little bit more about the space, because like I said, it needs demystification, but that I would say that demystification extends quite broadly. So here's what I would say about board readiness. I get asked all the time, and I have an 8 and a 10-year-old, and one day they asked what I do, and I said I help women get on boards, and they said, what's a board? And I had to distill that down into 8 and 10-year-old speak, and I said it's the boss of the bosses. And then they nodded their heads. They kind of got that. So but zooming out to your question, you need enough experience to guide a CEO, right? But the other thing I'll say about that is 2 quotes that have been played back to me. One is, every board's its own ecosystem. What do I mean by that? Well, think about it. A board is made up of a sitting CEO. That CEO may be a well-seasoned 4-time CEO. That CEO may be a founder who has no experience being a CEO and they're a first-time CEO. So that range in and of itself is quite broad, not to mention what's their kind of core skill set. Do they come from sales? Do they come from product? Do they come from business?
Yes.
So that's one piece. But the second piece is, who's the sitting board, right? It could be all investors, which is quite common in a venture-backed setting. It could also be, especially on a public company board, people with different skill sets. So what you're looking at is you're looking at where the gap is, and that's what you're there to fill. So that's part of it. The other quote I would mention is, someone said, if you've seen one board, you've seen one board. And it's true, because just that ecosystem I just described will build its own culture.
Yeah.
Not to mention, what industry is the company in? What stage are they at? Is this a Fortune 50 company, or is this a Series A company, right? Are they in growth mode? Did they just lose revenue in a crisis, right? So much depends. So I think that the good news about the broadness of the readiness is that more people are ready than they think they are. There is a data point that men will apply for a job if they feel 60% qualified, or women need to feel 100% qualified. So imagine this space you've never been in, maybe needs some demystification. I can guarantee you there's more people ready than are thinking about it. So to answer your question, I think more people should be thinking about it sooner. But I also think there are some real things, right? Which is, if you're going to have enough guidance for a CEO, you do need to be good at what you do. So some of the best advice is just to keep being great at your job. You do what you love, become great at it, and try and get into your boardroom as soon as possible, right? I was very fortunate. I was brought into the boardroom at 29 years old, and I learned really early that it was a different way of communicating, a different level of even talking versus listening. And I was continuously brought in. And I think there'll be people watching this who can help that in 2 ways. Some are operators who should ask to go to their board meetings, or help prepare for those board meetings, or get the download after the board meeting, right? If you're at a large company, it's really hard, right? Ask to go to, name your favorite Fortune 50 company board, right? However, if you are in a position to bring someone into the boardroom, do it. And you might even get pushback. I remember as an operator, I asked to bring someone into the board meeting because this woman knew more about the topic than I did. She happened to be on my team. And, a lot of times people are like, well, let's limit how many people present in the board meeting. I don't think that's always a great idea. I think especially when it comes to women in underrepresented groups, bringing them in, allowing them to be there is something that leaders can do, so that people can start to do their own demystification of this space.
Absolutely. I think the board meeting is a really interesting platform for internal development of talent at the company. And I've seen companies that really have a three-stage board meeting where first there's some kind of presentation that somebody that's not normally there gets to show their stuff to the board. And then there's the general session, and then there's the session where the investors kick the CEO out and talk about whatever they're going to talk about privately. And I listened to a talk by the founder of Blue Jeans that recently had a big exit in the video conferencing, and he said he opened up his early stage board meetings to the entire company, and he partly did it because he wanted what sales said to the board about why they were missing revenue to be the same as what they said to customer service. And he did it for like 3 years. So it's a really, really interesting thing. I also, I've seen Heidrick Struggles did this shadow project where they match people from other companies to a board in a kind of apprentice role, and you just get to follow around and sort of see what happens in the room, because as you say, it's really different behind the closed doors. So can you talk a little bit about how you see investors responding to this message, and sort of what things are working on making the case for inclusion, and what's persuasive on impelling them to action, right? As opposed to, yeah, it's a nice idea, but not at the top of my list.
Yeah, I mean, there's been motivators, right? I mean, there are a lot of the challenges of today, the multitude of crises that have revealed all sorts of inequality. I mean, we're actually reading about this now on the front page of the New York Times. And so I think we've moved a little bit from, hey, economically, this is good, to, wow, there's a lot more goodness here, whether that's safer products and market, better for the environment. Really, it goes on and on. And I think what I've seen is people are moving, there's a bias towards action.
Yep.
There's really a bias towards action. And what's hard about that, and you mentioned this in the beginning, is it seems to be more work, right, than just hiring that person you know, or calling that investor you know, and taking that first recommendation, right? So the trick here is making sure that people understand there isn't a pipeline issue. That's a perceived issue, which is easily understandable too. If you look at your own network and you don't see the diversity, you might perceive it to be a pipeline. But whether you're leveraging an organization like ours, or an executive recruiter, or any of the other services, there's many people who can widen that aperture and make it easier. And so what I see working is really people moving from something that was maybe at the end of the list to it's at the top of the list. In fact, there was a well-known business leader on one of our curated conversations who said, this is probably about 6 weeks ago, the prior month he had been to, I think he sits on 2 academic boards, 2 private boards, and 2 public boards. He's very active. He said never in his history had he seen diversity for the board be the #1 thing across all of these.
Right.
So I think where we're headed is encouraging. I also think the qualifications are broadening. You know, I think the historic thing was fiduciary responsibility. So we need some CEOs and CFOs, and those titles skew in favor of men.
Absolutely.
By definition.
Yeah.
Where we're headed now is people are looking more towards competencies. We've received more requests for CHROs, right? People. Wow, that's a great thing for a board, right? Product people, marketing people, not just marketing people, growth marketing people, people who've, you know, been through a digital transformation. So lots of different qualifications are also encouraging, because that means the aperture by definition is going to be more wide.
So I'm just going to play that back as advice for board seekers, that the path of becoming excellent and an expert at what you do is a better path to the board than it used to be. And you don't have to be the CFO or the CEO to be under consideration. And then I think it's not true just, as you said, for boards, but if you've got 60%, or, you know, if you can check some of the boxes, put your name in and have the conversation, because there are plenty of people that check less boxes than you that are putting their name forward.
Well, and the other thing I'd say is, most importantly, today, as we sit here, the vast majority of board members are found through word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So not only are you qualified and you're, you know, getting your operational expertise, but the other thing I share with people is make a list of all the CEOs and board members in your network that you know personally.
Right.
Make sure you reach out to them and proactively state your interest in board service. Remind them your skill set, what you bring to a board, and then specifically ask them to keep you top of mind. That's the most useful thing to do. You know, as an operator, if you're not in the finance organization and you don't touch your company's P&L, that's as easy as setting up time with your CFO and going through it,
sure.
right? So you can learn that through your own efforts. You don't have to be in a finance organization to learn P&Ls and understand them. And that financial expertise is something that you'll need on a board to understand their business, quite frankly.
So for career development, it's never too early to think about a board, and make sure that everybody in your network knows that you want it.
Yes.
Right. Okay. That's great. How about so?
Well, and one edit on that. Not everyone in your network. They might get sick of hearing that, but specifically CEOs, board members, and investors, because those are the people who actually can turn that intention into action. So yes.
Every person that can move the needle, right?
Yeah, and don't forget the CEO in your own company and the board of your own company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great. How about as founders? What advice would you have to founders about driving diversity and inclusion? And it doesn't just have to be through board mechanisms, but what do you see as most impactful from that role? What advice do you have for the founders in the audience?
So at one of our conversations, one of the most interesting comments was someone saying to a CEO founder on the call, "You are the DE&I officer."
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there's some truth to that. You know, the CEO, the founder sets the tone of the company, and you really want to reflect diverse. The reason we're out for diversity is because we want diverse perspectives. And the reason we want diverse perspectives is because better decisions get made. Mm-hmm. It's really that simple. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if a CEO is staring at a bunch of people that looks like, if it's a he, him, it's going to be harder to get that dissenting point of view, or that different point of view, or that customer point of view, right? And so I think most founders that come across understand that concept. I think increasingly, if they don't, they are hopefully getting a little bit educated by not only the current climate, their own board, or perhaps their employees. I had one CEO founder on another conversation who said he was so proud of his customer base being diverse, his employee base being diverse, his executive team being diverse, but he was embarrassed to show the company a picture of the board. Yeah.
And I've heard also, I mean, I've heard two other things. One, you have a lot of leverage in vendor selection. Mm-hmm. And I think people don't often, at least as often as I'd like to see, be intentional about that. And I had another speaker say, just as an individual, you know, challenge yourself on how diverse your personal network is. Because there are plenty, I certainly feel like I know plenty of people that they feel like they're diverse in what they do in their business practices, and then you look at the social network they're in, and it's not really there. And that doesn't mean that's bad, but it means that it's got a limited vantage point.
It does. And I think there's also the reality too, is that you're not looking just to add that one.
Right.
You're really looking to bring multiple diverse voices to the table so that those voices really have an impact.
Last thoughts so we've covered investors and founders and board seat seekers, for anyone else thinking about moving the needle in the startup ecosystem? Any last words?
I would say everyone who's probably watching this has some power to make a change. And it really starts with intention. And once that intention's there, taking the action is as easy as finding the service provider who can help you with that intention, right? It could be someone who's going to help you find a diverse vendor, as you mentioned, someone who's going to help you find that diverse board member. But I think the best thing we can all do is set an intention to pay attention to this and to make the changes in the spheres that we have access to.
Fantastic. Jocelyn, thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to ask everyone in the audience to call people out if they claim a pipeline problem. We have a solution right here. There's resources to find to make that part of it go away. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.